Good afternoon and welcome to the Federal Executive Forum celebrating 17 years of profiling excellence in government IT mission programs. I'm Luke McCormack. During today's show, we will discuss critical issues facing government and industry leaders with their secure cloud computing strategies and solutions. With me on today's show are Michael Mestrovich, Acting Chief Information Security Officer, Central Intelligence Agency. Dr. Ed Mays, Deputy Assistant Commissioner, Infrastructure Support Services, U.S. Customs Border and Protection. Brian Conrad, Acting Director, FedRAMP Secure Cloud Division at the Technology Transformation Services, GSA. Nicholas Spiess, Chief Federal Technologist, Snowflake. John Morello, Vice President, Cloud Protection, Palo Alto Networks. And Chris Roberts, Federal Technology Director, Quest Software Public Sector. We're talking secure cloud computing, and who better to start us off than Mike? We had C2S, and we have C2E. Give us a state of the state. A lot of moving parts over there. Big job for a Chief Information Security Officer.
Sure, thanks. And I appreciate the opportunity to be here. So, obviously, Luke, as you know, had a long history with cloud computing at the agency, specifically primarily focused on Amazon and infrastructure services. And we made great progress in transition to cloud in that space. C2E opens up the aperture much greater, multi-cloud providers offering everything from infrastructure services all the way through up to software services. And so it's a much broader, expansive cloud opportunity for us and our partners within the community. As I noted previously, a lot of focus was on your primary infrastructure services, compute, storage, those types of things. But we're really now moving up the stack. And so we're working with software solution providers for software as a service. We can talk a little bit more about that later. But right out of the gate, some of the big challenges that we're working through is, hosted desktop services, taking advantage of things like Office 365 to provision, desktop automation services, email, Office automation suite, so on and so forth. And then to also utilize some of the native cloud service offerings, such as, digital rights management and data loss protection services that are embedded within those cloud offerings. I think there's a lot of great potential with all of those different offerings. I think the challenge for us going forward, I know we'll get into this a little bit later, is understanding the telemetry from a multi-cloud environment, being able to make sense of that so that we have a comprehensive cybersecurity and operations view into that multi-cloud environment. But we're really excited about the opportunity. I think we've got a lot of great service providers and great partners in this space. And so we're anxious to take this to the next level.
A lot of capacity in the stable there. And just to clarify, C2E available to the entire IC, correct?
That's correct. Yes, sir.
Fantastic. Dr. Ed Mays, a lot of activity going on over at CBP. You all have been on a cloud journey, continue to go on a cloud journey. Tell us what's happening. Give us a state of the state.
Well, I think the big thing for us right now is zero trust, right? Identity and access management being one of the key pillars, role-based access. We're pushing really hard, using tools like Okta and Zscaler. And we're also looking at a multi-account architecture, which allows us to segment our accounts. So if we have a cyber issue, we can actually limit the blast radius. So, we've been doing a lot of work there. Big push will be for the future, getting out a vehicle, a contract that will allow us to support our cloud growth. Because the thing that we're doing is we plan on being out of the data center, hopefully 2025, 2026. We're not giving up on that. So that's really big for us. The other thing is I think that, we are looking at a cloud services brokerage. We've got a cloud center of excellence. And, to be able to manage all the services for cloud, providing business case analysis, architecture, all those kinds of things to our customer base. So we're going to go from, I think, minimal services to what I'll call a full service organization where our app developers can just come in a la carte and choose what they want. But, under governance and with an organization that can help them, get the best for their dollar. Right. We've gone through this a lot, and there's lots of services in places like Amazon, but you've got to really be smart about how you use those services. So that's going to be our big focus.
Right. Put some structure in place, a la carte ordering, and some guardrails around it. I'm sure a lot of lessons learned you can pull from Mike and crew out of the IC. Brian, you all have been on a tear over there. It seems like there's a hockey puck of activity happening, which is awesome. The community loves it. Tell us about where you are with the FedRAMP capabilities.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me today. So FedRAMP continues to play that critical role, that nexus between agencies who are moving to the cloud and the cloud service providers who are innovating with this great technology. And since FedRAMP's establishment 10 years ago, the program has, as you mentioned, has seen steady growth. And it's through this partnership with agencies and cloud service providers that we've been able to authorize over 250 cloud services available in the FedRAMP marketplace. And those 250 cloud services have been reused over 3,800 times to date. And so as demand grows, the program, my challenge is the program's got to scale. Because as you mentioned, it's not slowing down. It's things are moving faster. There's a rush to the cloud. And again, the critical role that FedRAMP plays is to ensure that the agencies have secure cloud services to use. And so we have some really exciting things going on, some plans for automation of not only how we handle packages, but our internal business processes. We're going to continue to grow the marketplace to make sure the agencies have secure cloud services to use and also keep up with our communication and our stakeholder outreach.
Yeah, being an early JAB member, it was tough sledding in the beginning there, and it's great to see you go from 24 months to 12 months to 6 months, and maybe I'll try to pin you down on where the goal is there as far as we're going to see, FedRAMP capability in a month or 6 weeks. I won't hold you to that. Let me get Nicholas on here. It's interesting when I think about Amazon. Amazon doesn't happen unless there's an entire infrastructure of internet capability out there just sort of dropped on top of it, enabled a new business. I sort of see Snowflake with the same thing, right? They kind of came in, assumed cloud. Here we go. Tell us what's happening with Snowflake, Nicholas.
Yeah, thanks very much, Luke. Great to see you as always. And hello, panelists and folks at home. I like Mike's comment, so I'm going to bring it back again. We're moving up the stack, and I'm happy to say in cloud there finally is a stack. It's not just somebody else's computer running a bunch of VMs for you. We have software as a service offerings now. We have these very vast cloud computing resources that we can call on, and it enables products like Snowflake to be built and brought to market to enable high-level services, better data flow, better data-driven decisions. And better data coordination and collaboration, which every time I get on this show, Luke, I talk about nonstop. So if you're playing bingo at home, that's the first word. But it really is critical to the success of every agency and the government in general, being able to collaborate on data, being able to leverage massive cloud computing resources. Without that, we couldn't do any of the artificial intelligence or machine learning workloads that every government agency is starting to dial into now. So it's a very exciting time to be in cloud computing.
Right. And, just the ability for an organization like yours to take advantage of this capability and make it available to the decision makers is fantastic. John, we can't do any of this unless we secure it, we enable it. Enter Palo Alto. Tell us what's happening.
I mean, a lot of the themes that have been brought up already are really what guides our view of doing cloud security, most notably the necessity of doing it in a heterogeneous manner. So it's not tied to just a single cloud provider. I think Brian was mentioning that they're seeing more agencies and more organizations that are adopting multiple different clouds. So just as you want to have FedRAMP in all the places that you're going, you need to have security tooling that gives you that visibility across all those physical locations and physical providers that offer these services. And then to Nicholas's point, as that cloud stack progresses up from just being infrastructure as service, you also need to have those capabilities throughout the application stack. So not just looking at the configuration of the virtual machine, but looking at everything from like the S3 buckets that surround it and load balancers that are there, and looking at it throughout the entire life cycle, not just the asset after it's been deployed, but how do you, as the term often used, shift left and look at those things prior to deployment when that asset just exists as a code artifact, as like a Terraform template or a CloudFormation template prior to being actually created in the cloud provider. And so our view really is to give you that breadth of capabilities across all the different clouds that you use, up and down the stack of technologies, and throughout the life cycle of those applications.
Right. It is an enabling capability with multi-cloud, et cetera. very complex capability as well, big attack surface, et cetera. You need a lot of tools and technology to pull this all together. Chris, enter Quest Public Software or public sector software. Tell us how you're snapping into all this and enabling this fantastic capability to happen.
And sure. One of the beautiful things about cloud is that it gives us capabilities that normally in the legacy fashion were very difficult to pull off. So now we can do things at scale at the push of a button. That's good and bad, both from a service delivery, but also a consumption and cost model. But honestly, that at scale is very important. We looked at it two ways, and that is first, there's getting there and then staying there. Getting there is the lift. We used to call it lift and shift, replatform. But honestly, once we got there, we realized that we can now do things at scale from a data perspective. So at Quest, for instance, we made a lot of investments around governance. So Zero Trust addressed a lot of security issues we had, both on-prem, moving into the cloud, identity management. Those are the building blocks. But then we started looking, well, how are you actually going to do governance, not just from identity, but also for data? We've now moved data sets that were usually enclosed, very well formatted, understood databases on-prem into the cloud. We've seen what can happen when you don't secure a bucket properly, for instance. We've seen what can happen when the right privilege or the wrong privilege is assigned to an end user who shouldn't have access to specific data points, for instance. So think of all the internal data that really is significant for a citizen, for an agency, and how that data can be misused. So governance is critical for us. So part of governance is not just the identity, but it's the identification of that data. What does a data pipeline look like, for instance? Which applications should be able to access that data? Do the service principles being used by that application to pull in and push data across that pipeline, do they have the right privilege? So we focus on governance, both on the identity side as well as the data side. And we do a lot of blocking, tackling under the surface, so like the duck in the water, so to speak. But the important thing, I think, for agencies, for everyone in this conversation this morning or listening to this, is that if you haven't considered the governance equation as you're moving to the cloud, you're asking for issues. And all you have to do is do a quick Google search on unsecured data in the cloud or buckets, and you'll be surprised what you actually find. So we've made tremendous investments there, and we continually work with our partners in the federal space to actually get them more secure.
Governance very key, and sort of that push button service, interesting, very inviting, but then the bill comes. Ed, you talked about this a little bit. I'm going to come back up to you to give us a specific example of, you all are on this journey. You've gotten a lot of lessons learned internally. You're also hearing from various agencies about how you're going to roll forward. You mentioned Zero Trust as well. Give us an example of a specific program you'd like to highlight.
Well, one of the key things I'll tell you, first of all, just want to say for Chris Roberts, we just pushed out our data strategy for the cloud. And you're absolutely right. It's imperative that we understand our data and that we secure our data. So we're focused on that as well. One of the big programs that we've got that I think is really important is non-person entity comms, right? Either machine to machine or machine to software communications. That's big for us because you really want to make sure that those machines actually can authenticate, verify that it's an actual organizational entity that it's communicating with. That's been pretty important to us, and it's really I think grown across not only just CBP but also in DHS. It's a big program. And I think it's really providing a lot of return on investment. I don't have to guess anymore. I know when, what those certificates are, who they belong to, when they expire, and if something weird is happening, that's unauthorized. So non-person entity certificates are pretty important to us. And also, I'm not sure how many of you have experienced, certificates expiring, but that's just one of those, that can just ruin your day, especially if you've got a mission critical environment. So actually having, machine learning tell you what's happening in your environment and preventing all those things from occurring is a game changer for us. So NPE, and we are using, I think, Venafi for that, and it's been huge. When I first came to CBP, probably circa 2016, 2017, we had outages, I would say weekly, because of this, because it we're just so voluminous, right? Over 100,000 endpoints, plus network, plus. And, this has made our lives a lot better and a lot more controlled and secure.
Right, and obviously operating machine to machine, so it's real time, and a lot of cargo coming across the border, a lot of passengers coming into the country, automobiles, et cetera. You all are definitely working in real time. John, how about at Palo Alto Networks? You know, you're in a unique situation where you're obviously striped across the entire federal sector, state and local, but the private sector as well. Give us an example of a program you'd like to highlight.
Well, I mean, we've been proud to be part of a lot of different programs across the federal government, even prior to the time that we sold our company, Twistlock, to Palo Alto Networks. I think that one of the most important things that you can do as a security vendor is to really try to improve the overall level of knowledge and awareness across the community, not just purely from a selling standpoint, but really to genuinely contribute back in a meaningful way. One of the things that I'm most proud of is the work that we did around NIST SP 800-190, which is the container security guide, which ended up becoming the authoritative guidance on container security, which is, containers are really driving a lot of this new innovation that Nicholas and others have mentioned that really sits on top of that infrastructure as service that's been there for a while. We're also very proud to have been part of a number of projects across all sectors in the federal government space. We have well over 100 federal agencies and organizations that are customers across the intelligence community, Department of Defense, civilian, and that's something I'm very proud of. And in fact, and we can reference this publicly because they've spoken about it. We're even part of the F-35 program and part of the critical supply chain elements there that utilize cloud technologies to ensure that aircraft can be serviced and be put to use globally, and to be able to keep that supply chain, which is very complex and sources many different, really high-end components, keep that supply chain running regardless of the deployment location. So, for us, we see that contribution in terms of knowledge as being really important, but also just being really proud to support the various federal customers that that have trusted us to help them secure their cloud environments.
Fantastic, and a very important part of this ecosystem. Mike, we jumped right in with C2E, C2S. Didn't really explain, or what is that, so the audience knows exactly what that is, and then give us an example of a program you'd like to highlight.
Sure. Thanks, Luke. So C2S obviously was the first foray by the community into cloud computing, and that was specifically a contract vehicle with Amazon to provide infrastructure, compute, and storage services to the community. And so that was C2S. C2E has built on that foundation, and C2E is a multi-cloud environment with multiple players to include Google, Microsoft, Amazon, Oracle, IBM as well. And so now you have a multi-cloud environment coming in. Obviously, the benefit of that to the consumer is that there are various different service offerings that can be layered on any one or all of those various different cloud service providers. And you obviously, as a consumer, can then pick and choose which cloud service provider and their associated third-party solution providers maybe best fits your specific mission needs. So it gives a much broader aperture to the consumers to pick cloud hosting services and their ecosystems of service providers that can best suit their particular mission. I'm going to kind of switch gears on you because I think it's worth highlighting it. And since I was there, I think I can claim a little bit of credit for this activity. But when I was down at the State Department and COVID hit, let me back up. I think a lot of the advantages of cloud were obviously highlighted by that traditional storage and compute that any organization had online 365 days out of the year. That was only used at a specific period. And so the classic case that's cited in the government workforce, right, is it's eval season and everybody's hitting the servers to do their performance evaluations. And that's kind of, the September timeframe. But historically, you would have that compute and storage online the other 11 months, and it wasn't really being used. Obviously, cloud changed that paradigm. We were able to spin up cloud services to fully support those types of seasonal activities. And that reduced, obviously, the total operating costs and allowed cloud services to expand out as the mission needs dictated. So that was some years ago, and I think we're well founded in that. But when I was at the State Department and COVID kicked off, we needed to do a whole series of application developments to support, repatriating Americans that were stranded overseas, getting aircraft to get those individuals, getting vaccines out to various different embassies and posts. And the applications to track all of that and do all that categorically didn't exist. And it was only through cloud services and cloud solution providers, and specifically software as a service application providers, that we were able to iterate and deliver, a series of, over a dozen application services within the span of like 6 or 8 weeks, and then continuously iterate on those in kind of in a DevOps agile environment. I think that's, as we look to cloud next gen and C2E, that's the next promise, right? Is beyond the infrastructure services of scaling out for compute and storage and getting into rapid application development that really supports the pace of the mission, and getting into an agile development cycle that allows us to continuously iterate on solutions, put those solutions in front of consumers, have them continuously provide updated requirements back to the application team, and continuously develop those in a rapid cycle. I think that's the next step for us, and I think that holds tremendous advantage.
Really moving up the value chain. So I really do appreciate that. We're going to take a short break. We'll be right back. You're listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Network. We're talking about secure cloud computing, and we were just talking about specific programs. I'm going to throw it over to you, Nicholas. Give us an example. You gave us a great state of the state. Tell us about a specific program you'd like to highlight.
Yeah, Luke, thanks. I think there's always a theme when we talk about a special program or a special aspect of cloud computing or whatever topic we're talking about. There's always a theme that comes up, and in this one with cloud computing, I think the theme that's slightly bubbling to the surface here would be quantity. Lots and lots and lots of data that we now have the ability, because of cloud computing, to calculate against and to act against in a cost-efficient and effective way. We didn't used to have that on-prem, going through hundreds of millions of rows, as it was mentioned by Dr. Mays and by Michael. It was very difficult to spool up on-prem resources just for a big compute action and calm those things down when you were done. And one of the places that Snowflake has had a huge impact in our relatively brief time in public sector is fraud, waste, and abuse programs. This is a lot of data from a lot of different sources coming together in a single place and being worked on and looked at as, looking at human behavior is extremely difficult to predict and extremely difficult to categorize. It's why cybersecurity attacks have been so successful for so long. It's very difficult to get ahead of everything a person might do. And so bringing more data, as much data as we can, to bear to that problem and look at behavioral analytics and kind of churn through this data and look for things that are wrong. For example, it's very easy to say that somebody didn't have a hip replacement in California and Florida in the same day, right? You're either the most unlucky person on the planet, or that was a fraudulent transaction. That's very easy for a lot of data and a lot of compute to pick out. What's even more difficult, though, are teams of people working together to defraud certain programs of the government. That takes a lot more data from a lot more sources and a lot more observations to really detect the patterns that tell us that fraud, waste, and abuse is occurring. So I think, there's a lot of, we could go on and on and on. Somebody mentioned COVID, there's health research, there's all these great programs that are coming out there that Snowflake has very happily been a part of. But I think the one right now that kind of strikes a chord with cloud computing for me is fraud, waste, and abuse.
Very important area and a lot of opportunity there, no question about that. Brian, you brought up a lot of interesting facts and figures there, and just want to ask you to perhaps highlight one activity. You've got a lot of different activities going on there, the automation activity, you got Rev 5, who knows when Rev 6 is coming. Tell us about a specific program you'd like to highlight.
Yeah, I'm really excited about the automation efforts that we've undertaken. The work that FedRAMP has done with NIST to develop OSCAL. Excuse me.
And if I could, OSCAL is what?
The Open Security Controls Assessment Language.
Okay.
I'll have to validate to see if I have that right. A lot of acronyms running around up here.
Sure.
But what this will enable to do, the implementation of this will enable agencies and cloud service providers to automate their packages. SSPs are upwards of 800 pages. 800-page Word document gets very unwieldy. And so being able to automate the package handling, doing validations of the package prior to it coming to an assessor in the government, huge valuable things, not just for the agencies, but for the cloud service providers as well. All in service of creating velocity, all in service of creating better quality packages. In addition, FedRAMP also published a threat scoring methodology for controls against the MITRE ATT&CK framework. And where this is important is the scoring methodology takes the controls, scores them against the MITRE ATT&CK framework on how well they detect, protect, and respond to incidents. And so what we've been able to do with the Rev 5, the NIST 853 Rev 5 controls, is NIST published their baselines, and typically the Joint Authorization Boards adds controls on top of the published baselines to make the NIST baselines more applicable to cloud. And so what we've done in our draft Rev 5 baselines is taken that threat-based methodology against those additional controls that are typically added to see how well they actually do their job in supporting cybersecurity. And what we've done in our draft baselines, we've actually been able to reduce the number of controls in the FedRAMP high and moderate baselines, which translates into a significant value for not just the cloud service providers, but for the agencies as well. All of our modernization efforts, even looking at what I call the back end, the flip side of the coin, are internal business processes. We're working on business processes that are 10 years old, and so we have the opportunity to use automation to reevaluate our business processes to make sure that we're being more transparent, so cloud service providers can understand where their package is in the process, for agencies to understand where things are, how things are going, et cetera, and so forth. Again, it's all in service of helping the agencies and the cloud service providers get married up and have those secure cloud services available.
And undoubtedly reduce cycle time, which is awesome. That sounds fantastic. Chris, how about at Quest? Can you give us a specific example of a program you'd like to highlight?
First, shout out to Brian for reducing the number of controls that we have to respond to in an RMS.
Yeah, I like the sound of that.
They're draft baselines, Chris.
You have to start somewhere, sir. You start somewhere. So when we look at our agency partners, they're our favorites. Anyone that's in service or out of service. So those in active duty, for instance, as well as our veterans. So a lot of the programs we've worked on, and Brian, I appreciate your comments around legacy 10-year-old processes, because we work with agencies that have 20, sometimes 30-year-old processes. And they came to us and they're trying to modernize, but at the same time you're modernizing, you want to pull off that trick of helping an end user see that, hey, nothing's really changed. We've changed everything under the surface, but for you, nothing's really changed. To do that, that means the processes they've been using, whether it's identification, authentication, those things kind of have to remain the same. So we worked with DoD partners, for instance, to bring in that legacy infrastructure that they've built on usually Microsoft technologies, for instance, but then helping them spread that technology across the cloud, whether it is Microsoft-based, Azure-based, for instance, or AWS, and helping them integrate those identity principles across multiple control planes, or we call it multi-cloud, or as Mike called it, C2E. For them, that is critical, because when you have someone on the front line, or even someone who's come back from the front line, for instance, that is a complexity they don't need, for instance. So making sure those identities work across those different control planes without having to give them multiple identities, for instance, is critical. I, as an end user, know for one, when I come in the morning, I expect to be able to use every application with this persona. I don't want to have to, if you used an iPhone that required 4 faces to open, you'd break it against the wall. So helping them both in service and out of service veterans, for instance, and active duty, for instance, be able to use applications in the same way they have used them, I would say, for the last 20 years, may sound trivial, But from an end user satisfaction and mission deployability capability standpoint, that's critical to infrastructure. So working with identity across those planes for us is a critical mission. And that's not just in DoD, that's across the entire federal government. As Brian said, there's so many aging systems, but you have end users that will still expect those systems to perform as advertised or have the same SLAs. And I think we provide a great set of solutions to help an agency, one, identify, to migrate, consolidate, and secure those identities across multiple control planes as we move to the cloud.
Identity management is such an important part of the attack vector issue, and an important and instrumental element in the zero trust architecture as well. Michael, we're going to go up and talk about priorities. I'd like to get you to highlight your priorities, 2 or 3 priorities for this year in 2022. What are you all focused on right now?
So I think most of the federal government, as you're probably well aware, is in the midst of responding to and planning to implement much of the president's executive order on enhancing cybersecurity. And we're no different in that regard. There's a national security memorandum that talks about how to enhance cybersecurity across the board. A portion of that national security memorandum talks about, migrations to cloud, but then there's other components, multi-factor authentication, standardizing, auditing, and logging capabilities, and the retention requirements across the board. Zero trust, obviously, is a key tenet of that national security memorandum and the executive order. Securing software supply chain, and the list goes on and on. So the vast majority of our efforts are going to be focused on implementation of the precepts that are identified in that national security memorandum. Now, beyond just that, I will tell you that, and it's been mentioned here, I think, a little bit in the past, is as we move into this multi-cloud ecosystem, what's important for us, not only for a cybersecurity perspective, but from an operations perspective, is getting the telemetry off of the cloud service providers that is in the native format from those cloud service providers, but being able to then normalize that so that we have a standard single view of operational and performance issues as they're occurring in our multi-cloud ecosystem. And in the same vein, we're pulling off of that cybersecurity relevant information amongst those cloud service providers. So we want to be able to obviously understand performance characteristics as we have workloads running in one particular cloud service. What are the differences if we move that workload to a different cloud service provider? And then how do we, and this was something that Chris mentioned, right? How do we track security relevant audit and log information, identity access, identity credential management, PKI certifications across various different cloud service providers, so that we're seeing a comprehensive picture? Fraud detection was one of the things that was mentioned, I think, by Chris, but equally important to us from a cybersecurity perspective is understanding how identity and access and application and data access controls in one cloud service provider are accurately reflected in the other cloud service providers. So if you're making an application cloud data access decision in one cloud service provider, is the same individual or the same entity trying to make other access calls in other cloud service providers? And should that be normal as based on the application and how it's architected and where its data flows are, or should that be flagged as abnormal? Those are the types of things that I think we need to spend more time on over the course of this year, which we'll be doing to gain better insights into a comprehensive cybersecurity view across all the cloud service providers as they're operating in real time.
You really raised some good points there. Hijacking identity in these collateral systems is where the fun starts, right? And where we had some of our biggest exposures based on that methodology. John, how about at Palo Alto Networks? Top focus for you all this year?
I mean, I think our primary focus in terms of how we're helping customers is to go back to that principle that I talked about the last time I spoke, about really taking the notion of security and moving it left in that time horizon. We see that really the best way to improve your security outcomes is to prevent problems from being created in the first place. I mean, that seems very obvious to everyone. And yet it's something that people have historically really struggled with, because the tools, the ecosystem, not just the security tools, but the overall ecosystem around cloud, historically, a lot of times people were really thinking of it just as a data center that happened to be in a different place. They were still creating things manually. They were still manually managing those assets. But as you've seen the technology mature within the ecosystem and there being a greater level of adoption and knowledge of concepts like GitOps and really trying to describe everything that you were deploying and using as some kind of code artifact, you really now have this awesome security opportunity to really improve your outcomes by being able to provide automation to go and check for those problems before those assets are ever deployed. So we have a whole set of technologies that help customers do that. But when I talk to agencies and even outside the federal space, just across all customers, people ask what's the most important thing they can do around cloud security. To me, the thing that's going to create the greatest outcome, the greatest positive outcome for you, is to begin inspecting those assets, be them container images, be them serverless functions, or be them infrastructure as code templates, as early in the life cycle as possible. When they're just sitting on a GitLab server or a file share or wherever it may be, looking at those things, finding problems in them, taking action on them before those problems are ever created.
Right. Again, as we open up this aperture of all these different types of capability, we certainly open up this attack surface as well. Ed, you talked about a lot of different things that you all are focused on. What are your top priorities for this year for 2022 as you go on this cloud migration journey?
Well, definitely a couple of things. We've already talked a little bit about zero trust, so that's top of the top. But we're also still focusing on automation, right? We've done a lot of automation presently, but we really want to get to standardized automation and getting some new tools in there and having one approach across our enterprise. And that's pretty important to us. And the other thing is customer experience, and customer experience from the perspective of, we've got our CI/CD pipelines. We those are standardized. But one of the things that we saw this year with operations, Allies Refuge and Allies Welcome, which was moving the people from Afghanistan, that, we were interacting, with multiple agencies, whether it was Department of State, USCIS, US Army. And this was one of those things about, you don't really know how the other people perceive what you're sharing with them, right? Or the tools that you're sharing with them. So customer experience became pretty important to us to make sure that not only can we deliver, code that was doing what it was supposed to do, but also making sure that it was easy to use and a quick, so that you have to go through a high learning curve. And that was pretty important to us. And it really paid dividends in terms of what we did with Operations Allies Welcome and Allies Refuge.
Tremendous focus and a brilliant response to that. So I applaud all the agencies involved in that. Nicholas, top priority for Snowflake this year?
Well, Luke, looking at this year, it's going back to some of the foundation of what Snowflake became popular for. One of the few platforms, in fact, the only data platform today that runs across clouds. And that's important because the goal I have for this year is to get more agencies to talk to each other and collaborate on data using the Snowflake platform. I mean, if you think about it, Dr. Mace just talked about how he would collaborate with USCIS and with the US Army. How can we really do that unless we have a shared platform or a shared experience or a well-designed enterprise that enables that kind of collaboration? If you hear our CEO talk or you go to our website, you'll hear about the data cloud over and over and over again. And what the data cloud really is the next level, the next evolution of the Snowflake platform that allows folks to collaborate and trade data sets similar to how you might trade playing cards. Data sets for Snowflake are like apps on your app store, but instead of Angry Birds, you're getting housing prices or the latest data set from NOAA on weather. Every government agency has a specific mission. That's what they were designed to do, and that's awesome. But no agency has a sole purpose. They all work together to accomplish what they're going to work together. Michael's agency works constantly with FBI or the Department of Homeland Security. These kinds of collaborations keep us safe, keep us healthy, keep us financially secure in this country. And so we have to keep pushing that collaboration and helping agencies work together stronger and better. That's my top priority for this year, is to introduce the data cloud for government using the Snowflake platform.
You raise a good point about every agency has a specific mission, no question about that. But they also have they're sort of striped across a user experience, which is what I think Ed was bringing up there. Important to focus on that user experience. We're going to take a short break and we'll be right back. You're listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Network. We're talking about secured cloud computing. We're talking about priorities. I'm going to roll it up to you, Brian. You talked about a lot of different things. Top priority for FedRAMP. I know you're wrestling that paper tiger to the ground. What else you got going on there?
Well, we have multiple efforts going on, right? All of them complementary. Again, we're laying the foundation for modernizing the program through our automation efforts. Obviously, the big one and that's of concern for everybody probably watching is the transition from 853 Rev 4 to Rev 5.
Mm-hmm.
We completed our public comment period, received several hundred comments on the baselines. And so, just the fabulous team that I have over there at FedRAMP is working through to adjudicate those comments and then putting together the final baselines for the JAB approval. Of course, understanding that that's a touchy subject as well. We understand that the transition from one baseline to another is very complex and large in scope. And, we're also working out the transition plan that we're going to ask CSPs to adhere to. And then, it's continuing to leverage the insights of the agencies in the industry cybersecurity community. This is a multifaceted issue. And just because we don't see something doesn't mean it's going on. So, it's that continued outreach that, the interaction with our industry partners and with our agency partners to make sure that we keep our eye on the ball.
Right. I remember when you all did that JAB Interact, got a lot of good input. I think that's really important. Chris, top priority. We'll get to lessons learned in a minute for Quest at this point this year.
And sure, if you talk to different individuals in the federal team at Quest, they'll have different priorities because they're agency focused and agency specific.
Of course.
Our team being the Technologist, we're very focused on delivering our ability to help an agency move to manage, to secure both their on-prem to hybrid and cloud native operating environments. Applications and services may change over time, but there's certain core fundamental things that actually have to work as advertised. So when we talk to an agency, the first thing we try to understand is, one, how are you planning to meet the current crop of executive mandates, for instance? Those things deal with securing our nation. And quite frankly, if you just watch the news, it's painfully obvious that a lot of us are ill prepared, whether it's personally in your home network, whether it's an agency network or a corporate network. It's clear to see that there's a lot of work to do. When you look at the executive orders, quite frankly, and you break down all the different components, even if you break down zero trust, there's some 4 things that always come to mind for me. And that is, one, do we actually know our users intimately? Who's on our network? What are they doing? Do we understand the data? Nick talked about the fraud in the network, in healthcare, for instance, and how Snowflake addresses that. And when you think about all the data across all these platforms, and as Dr. May said, can we collaborate, talk to different agency partners? I remember the formation of DHS came about because of the fact that we couldn't collaborate and communicate as a country from an agency perspective to protect the country. So the understanding the data, where it is, who has access to it, and how do we provide applications access to that data safely is very important. The third thing I think about is the number of nodes or endpoints that are interconnected across these government networks. That is daunting, quite frankly. And that's where, I think John talked about that, for instance, from a Palo Alto perspective of, how do you actually protect an endpoint, for instance? How do you know the right packets going to the right destination, for instance? And as Dr. Mays talked about, that machine-to-machine cooperation or communication, that speaks to APIs. I don't know of anybody that's now obsessed, for instance, about the application ports per se, as we used to in the old days. It's now, what are the APIs being used, for instance? What service level integrations are actually going on? For a data application to work across multi-cloud and C2E, for instance, you've got to have some relative confidence that the right user, the right data, the right endpoint, for instance, and the API in use are all being used in the correct manner. So for us, the top priority is to help our federal agencies actually work within those architectural models to deploy zero trust, to give them access to both what they have in the legacy information databases and legacy systems, but move them forward into a cloud native infrastructure platform where they can get infrastructure platforms and software as a service in a service model, quite frankly, that will deliver the next generation of computing services to both our citizens as well as those who work within our federal agencies. Tall order, but that's what we're going to be working on.
Great focus. I'm going to ask the three federal members here, top lesson learned. Mike, start with you. Number one lesson learned.
I think the number one lesson learned from us realistically is that allowing human individuals to do configurations in cloud services allows for variance across those cloud services. And oftentimes those variants happen manifest themselves in one of two ways. The application or the service that you're trying to deliver doesn't perform as you expect, or number two, there's some cybersecurity vulnerability that's exposed because configuration settings weren't set the proper way. So for us, as much as possible, automating deployment of applications and services across cloud services, scripting virtually everything, making it all infrastructure and services as code so that the code can be reviewed and not the actual individual who's doing the application settings. That's the biggest lesson for us, I think, going forward. And I think we're making great strides in delivering on that common CI/CD pipeline. But that's one of the biggest lessons learned, I think, from our cloud journey so far.
Good focus of attention. Ed, top lesson learned.
I think the top lesson learned is monitoring from a cyber perspective, watching what's happening in your environment, looking for potential data loss, those kinds of things. Obviously tracking spending, but an example I'll tell you is we had something happen in our O365 tenant. It wasn't a bad thing, but it was one of those things that we were monitoring, and we actually saw it and we alerted Microsoft, and it was just it gave us a lot of confidence that what we were doing was right and was going to protect us. That was huge. I mean, because I will tell you, about 3 years ago, we didn't have that. And so we're in a much better place. So I think data loss prevention, looking at that, monitoring in terms of security is definitely, important.
Keeping that environment secure. Brian, you're sitting in the catbird seat. Number one lesson learned you'd like to communicate to the community?
Continued collaboration. Absolutely. I touched on it a little bit previously. This is a multifaceted issue. The things that our agency partners are seeing is not necessarily what we're seeing. The industry partners have a different perspective as well. And, we're orchestrating that in FedRAMP to make sure that, that the cloud services are secure and that agencies can adopt them. And the only way we can do that is through continued outreach, continued collaboration, speaking to industry groups, agency organizations, et cetera. And, and I have to say that, all the stakeholders that I interface with and at the PMO interfaces with are all incredibly supportive, even leadership at TTS and through OMB.
Yeah, and the FedRAMP program office doing a fantastic job on the outreach. Really do appreciate it. All right, we're going to wrap it up here, and we're going to talk about painting a picture of the future. Chris, we're going to start with you. A couple of years from now, what does it look like at that point?
Honestly, from a future perspective, it's hard to put ourselves out there, quite frankly.
Mm-hmm. That's why I only went 2 years.
So look, in the future, I fully expect to have our data collected, consolidated, analyzed, normalized, literally how we will feed the machine that will drive intelligence that will help us in every area of our lives. That sounds ominous, for some people scary, but we're doing it right now, whether we like it or not. There's a great book I read earlier. It's a big, fat book, and it's called, it's based on surveillance capitalism, and it's where we are, quite frankly. So being able to control how my data is collected, how that data can then help me in my life, whether it's health, whether it's finance, relationships. We do that now in decision support systems. We do that now when we ask Outlook to find a meeting that everybody can attend at the same time. We're using data right now in every aspect of our life. The difference is that we don't control it, and we cannot determine exactly what the outcome of that data will be for us individually. So in the future, I fully expect, whether it's the Amazon platform or the Microsoft platform, whether it's Snowflake or whether it's Palo Alto protecting where that data is going and how it gets there, for instance, I fully expect data to be at my beck and call. And if we don't deliver on that, that'll be a severe, not just a disappointment, but I think a catastrophe for humanity. We have to figure out as a society how we're going to make data and the information systems we have enabled to really support society, to support the individual, and especially the citizen in the way we actually do our functions within the country.
And serve it up in a way that is a great user experience as well. John, how about Palo Alto Networks? Fast forward, what's the demand signal out there from your customers? What are you looking at in 2 years?
Well, I mean, I think the trends that we've seen over the past couple of years, I don't see those trends really changing over the next 2 years towards in the future. And specifically, what I'm referring to is the notion of agencies obviously trying to become more cloud centric in terms of moving more things out of traditional data centers, but also becoming and just continuing to become intentionally multi-cloud. And when I say intentionally multi-cloud, it's not a matter of like, well, we had a bunch of groups that kind of went off and did their own thing, and now we have things in Azure and AWS and GCP, but instead to do that with a purpose. And that purpose we see from a lot of for a lot of rationale. One of them is just having a better negotiating position with those vendors. If they know that you can move assets to different providers, they've got much more of a incentive to work with you on pricing and contractual terms. There's also certain vendors that may have stronger services in given areas, like Google Cloud, for example, has very good machine learning capabilities. Perhaps you want to take advantage of that, but you also want to take advantage of Amazon for their infrastructure as service. So that notion of things being intentionally multi-cloud, including your own private clouds that you run, I mean, those are not going away, even as we move everything to AWS and so forth. I mean, there's still a substantial amount of compute that's going to live in private cloud environments and will for a long time. And things like containerization and Terraform and these other technologies allow you to have a commonality of the way that you manage those resources across those different physical locations. And so for us, and really the whole bet for us in Prisma Cloud is that people need security tooling that spans across all those places and spans across the time horizons from the time that you design that infrastructure as code or that container image until the time that you're building it and deploying it and running in production.
And we really do appreciate all the work that you all are doing. Nicholas, you all are kind of striped across all these multi-clouds already. What does it look like for Snowflake and the Snowflake experience 2 or 3 years from now?
Yeah, I appreciate it, Luke. I'm going to make this a little bit more blunt, I'm going to combine comments made by John and Chris, right? Because Chris, a little while ago,
he teed you up there.
You know what? We're going for it. Chris talked about endpoints and APIs in software and how we're interacting with applications and moving data around. And then a little bit later, John was talking about some of the multi-cloud stuff. I think really where we're going to end up is that we're not really going to know. We'll know because we're the technology geekery behind the scenes, but the majority of our users won't know what cloud they're even operating on. They won't know where the data is coming from that they're using to make better decisions. They'll just know that they're getting the latest and greatest that our architecture can provide to them. And I think that's really the key here. Everything is going to be an endpoint or an API. If I need a machine learning algorithm, maybe I go to Google. If I've got some very low light code that I want to run in Lambda, I go to AWS for that. If I've got this sort of way of shopping around and find the best individual microservices that we can put to bear on our problems, that's the real promise, I think, of the cloud getting to that point. Snowflake's working on some of that, connecting data in AWS with Azure, with GCP, making all that available to users and collaboration across agencies. But really, I think the entire IT industry is going to go that way, because why would you reinvent the wheel when you can just drive somebody else's car? That's probably a great way to look at it. And the other thing is the outcome of that. Once we've got that built, what do we look for in our society? What's going to hit us is going to be better evidence-based decision-making. Raw data becomes information which is then applied to a problem and a decision is made. That is the process all of us go through every day. And the better information we have, the better data we start with, the better those decisions will be. We've got laws that are telling us to be more evidence-based. This is how I think we'll get there, Luke.
Fantastic, and really do appreciate that. Brian, you passed Rev 5. You're fairly fully automated. I think you guys are under 6 months now to turn these things around. What's it look like in 2 to 3 years? Are we going to get down to 4 months, 2 months? What's the future look like?
So in 2 to 3 years, I envision the FedRAMP program to have our automation capability operational. So packages are submitted. We don't have assessors running through 800-page SSPs anymore. We have web APIs established, so cloud service providers are pushing their Kanban scans into our platform, and that information is being dashboarded in a little more frequency than the agencies are getting it now. Now they're getting it once a month with regards to the JAB. We want to see that frequency increase, so it gives the agencies better evidence, like Nicholas talked about, to make decisions. And so again, it's the work that's done up to this point, and we're being very slow and deliberate on how we automate, because we're setting the foundation for the program for the next 5 to 10 years. But I would expect in the next 2 to 3 that our automation capability will be operational, and we'll see. So our authorization timelines for the JAB are around 4.5 months at this point.
Wow.
There's going to be a point where we can't go any lower, because we have to put the rigor behind the assessment. But there are still gains to be made. And same with the on the agency authorization side, looking at how to, increase the velocity there without sacrificing the veracity of the assessment.
Right, no doubt. You get to a point of diminishing returns, but you don't have to burn as many calories to do it, which I think the community would really appreciate. So thank you for everything that you're doing there. Ed, you talked about zero trust. You talked about a contract you're going to lay out there. Let's assume, you're never done with zero trust, but your contract's out there. You're in a multi-cloud environment. If you look around 2 to 3 years from now, what are you expecting to see?
Well, I think Nicholas hit on it. I'd like to see an environment, an AI-powered platform, if you will, that allows us to create, understand, and act on knowledge effectively, right? For instance, having a cloud services brokerage, we want to be able to architect quickly and dynamically and get the best delivery, fastest delivery for the lowest cost, and, without having a lot of human interaction. And I think that's going to be, it's going to drive our value stream. And, if we can secure that and move it fast, I think that's where we want to be in a couple of years.
Right. And it's, again, focused on that automation. I think that's really important. Mike, I guess in 2 to 3 years, obviously C2S will be sunsetted, C2E fully realized. You're way up the value chain. What are you thinking about? If I'm a software developer, in the IC, what can I expect to have as far as goods and services at my disposal?
I'll make a potentially bold prediction, but I would say, and I think
we love bold predictions here, Mike.
It's everything is code. No longer do we have network engineers. No longer do we have system admins. Everything is code. If you're the traditional network jockey that jumps on a console, command line, your days are numbered. If you're a system admin who's building servers, your days are numbered. Everything becomes code. And that gets us a lot of benefits and consistency, proper cybersecurity. We know the way things are deployed. Brian mentioned automation, fully supportive of, automating the cybersecurity and the assessment process. These are the things that get us to speed of mission, is automating everything so that we know there's a consistently deployed application and service throughout our cloud service providers. And then Nick obviously focused kind of at the end of that as to making decisions. So you have automated machines, automated processes. You're being fed huge amounts of data, not only by the applications themselves that are running, by the Internet of Things and the sensors that we have out there. And somewhere on the back end is the AI engine that's pulling all of that together and sifting through the data. And I think it's going to begin to tee up decisions for humans. But ultimately, we want that engine to make some subset of decisions for humans, because it can make those decisions at scale. Now, I think that the question of ethical AI bridges into here. Like, what are the decisions we're allowing the machines to go ahead and make versus what are the decisions we want them to tee up for a human? I will tell you from a cybersecurity perspective, however, we want those AI engines to make decisions at the speed at which they're seeing the threats come in, because we just don't have enough time and enough people to analyze all those. And so we've got to craft the framework by which we say, this is the boundary within which we want the AI engine to go ahead and make decisions. Beyond this, tee it up for an analyst to come in and take a harder look.
Automation is the path to goodness. And we need to find the needle in the stack of needles, right? This has been a fantastic show, and I really appreciate all of you taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us for this program. I'd like to thank the sponsors for supporting us on this show. I'd like to thank the good people here at Federal News Network that make our program so successful and enjoyable. And most of all, I'd like to thank you, the listening audience out there that tune in every month. You're listening to the Federal Executive Forum, part of the Federal News Network.